If you're unsure of who you are and the value of who you are, you end up playing this comparison game, especially on social media. You're just seeing their success stories, you're seeing their highlights, but you don't see the rest of their life. And you've connected your value to your work versus who you are. And so it's so important to break your value of who you are from what you do.
So Ashwin and I met past, what, like 3 months ago, 4 months ago, something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and he gets things done. That's something I've noticed about you, Ashwin. I know that was something that Nick had met Ashwin before myself, and that was one thing that came up when Nick and I were talking, that like when Ashwin has an idea of something that he wants to do, he does it. It gets done. He starts rolling with it. And I've witnessed that too, and getting to know him and being friends with him. And he is, I'm going to let you, Ashwin, introduce yourself and whatever you'd like to share. But from my perspective and what I know of you so far, you're an illustrator, children's book author, educator, and plus a bunch of other things. So Ashwin, you can go for it. I know you have a presentation too. So however you want to go for it, the floor is yours.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I will dive right into it so that we have plenty of time for Q&A or a discussion on an idea. Hi, everybody. My name is Ashwin Chacko, and I'm a positive visual storyteller, and I use the medium of illustration and design to tell those stories. And for today, I thought, since I am a storyteller, why not start by sharing my story and hopefully through that process, teach you some of the lessons that I've learned along the way. And this is a little example of some of the work I do. Okay, let's dive into my story. So my story begins in the foothills of the Himalayas in this little school called Woodstock. It's an international boarding school, and there were more than 50 different nationalities. And like all Hollywood cliched movies, my school was full of cliques. You had the cool guys, the nerds, the gamers, the jazz club, and the outcasts. And of course, I wanted to be one of the cool kids. And growing up in the 90s, we were all into hip hop, rap, you name it. So, me being someone who grew up in India and didn't really have a lot of exposure to rap, my parents were missionary parents out in the village before I joined this international school, and so I didn't have any appreciation or any true understanding of rap or hip hop. But at the encouragement of the cool kids, and because of my darker complexion, I took to shaving my head, stealing my dad's t-shirts, and rocking a bandana like Tupac. Now, when I look back at this behavior of mine, this stemmed obviously from my want to fit in. I wanted to be a part of a group. And sometimes as creatives, we can do the same thing. We try to find a style that pleases people or that's on trend, or we might base our work on it. But the thing is, styles, fads, and trends, they change so quickly. And if you're chasing a style, it's like jumping at the back of a train. You're constantly at the bottom. This then prevents your work from having real impact, right? Because it stems from a place of insecurity, much like I was going through. So the deeper problem with insecurity, or the deeper root of insecurity, is fear. Fear steals our potential because it cripples us in inaction. And so the first lesson I learned is don't be afraid to make mistakes. So why are we afraid of making mistakes? This happens because we're often pursuing perfection. Perfection is an unrealistic thing. It's a pedestal that is put before us, but it's not something that is achievable. And when we fall into this trap of perfection, we can't move forward. Whereas if we start to look at mistakes as teachers, they then become opportunities for growth. They help us discover more about ourselves, and they open us up to new ways of doing things. So, for instance, back in 2018, I really wanted to learn hand lettering and typography. And I'd never done it before. I was obviously apprehensive about starting something new. But the reason I wanted to do this because I wanted to get hired to do it. And you can't get hired to do something you're not like sure of. And so rather than falling into my fear, I decided to create a 30-day project where I would create a typographic quote every single day for the next 30 days and post it on Instagram. It was important to post it on Instagram because I had to get past that fear. I had to face my giant, which was that apprehension, and put it in front of people. That way, I wasn't dwelling on the perfection. I was sharing my journey and I was revealing the process. Now, fast forward at the end of 30 days, I've created a body of work. There's 30 different typographical pieces, much like this one right here. I had taken a leap of faith, and that leap of faith led to things that I didn't expect at the start of the project. Because at the end of the project, I had a realization when I looked at all the work, the connection I made was that a lot of these pieces were about my lessons in as a freelancer. And so I said, okay, why not consolidate all this work into a book? And that's how I self-published my very first book, Keep at It. And if I had not followed the trail, if I had given in to my fear, I would not have then achieved this unexpected thing that I learned from the process of pursuing something that felt out of my reach. So that is a little thing of the book. Now, we all live in a very unique era. We have access to the world on our fingertips, and yet this can be the cause of our downfall because we're flooded with so much information. There's so many ideas, creative thoughts, and we have access to so many other creatives as well. And this creates this cycle within our heads, and we can start thinking, I'm not that creative. Look at all these great guys around me. I'm not unique. I am ordinary. I don't make good work. I must be a fraud. Now, these are all lies that we tell ourselves. If we allow these lies to fester, they become our reality. From the dawn of time, we as humans have loved telling stories. We use stories to explain phenomenon we don't understand, like a volcano erupts and you say the gods are angry. Our imaginations are super active and we use them to fill in the gaps that we don't understand. The lies we believe about ourselves and the words we allow others to speak over us shape who we become. Now, I want to stress this. What we believe about ourselves directly affects who we become and how we behave. I always felt that my value was connected in my work. And since I believed this, when I made work that I was not happy with, I felt depressed. It had a direct correlation. The work affected how I felt about myself. And this would then make me feel depressed, unhappy. And I believe that everybody else out there was more creative and better skilled than me. But all this changed when I switched my thinking from self-pity to self-care. And I shifted what I believed about myself. And I separated myself from my work and who I was. My value was no longer in what I did, but who I was on its own. And that's actually how I earned the moniker I have, which is Wacko Chacko. So at the start of the story, we started off with me dressed as Tupac. Fast forward a few years, I got the opportunity to go on exchange to Australia. I was suddenly outside my bubble, and because I was no longer inside this constrained little bubble of the world telling me how to dress and how to look, I suddenly was exposed to a whole world. And this exposure opened up the possibility for me. And I had this realization, if I want to live a life that I enjoy, I can no longer follow what other people are saying. I need to choose to do what makes me happy. And I had to embrace what was weird about me and own it. So you need to learn to know who you are, be true to yourself, and embrace the weird within. Often we are our own biggest enemies. You know, choice or choosing is one of the most spiritual things you can do. We choose to believe, we choose to work, we choose to have faith. And yet when it comes to our own futures, we like to leave things ambiguous. We like to cover inactivity with excuses. So my challenge to you is this: if you are unhappy with the narrative of your story, you have the power to change it by shifting what you believe. I choose to believe in my value and to make work about sharing and encouraging positivity. The future is now in your hands. What choice will you make today? So that's it from me. You can say hello at Wacko Chacko. I'm going to stop the screen share and then maybe we can dive into a discussion.
Love that, Ashwin. Love it. Thank you for that. I have so many notes. Chloe. I was watching Chloe's face the whole time. So awesome.
Just to caveat that, you know, just before the call, I talked about imposter syndrome, and I was having a sense of imposter syndrome. I'm like, who am I to talk to all these people? They're all brand strategists. I'm just an illustrator. What am I gonna, what value can I bring? And, you know, I had this realization, they're just people like me. And hopefully the lessons I learned, they've had their own journeys, their own experiences, and they can learn from that. And so, yeah.
Don't you love how life throws us practical applications of our own teachings?
Yeah.
It's wonderful. Love that. I would love to, like Ashwin said, open it up to you guys for questions or comments. Angela's saying in the chat that it definitely resonates.
Angie, you have your hand up. Go on,
Yeah.
Angie.
I have a question too.
Yeah.
First of all, I could not keep up with the notes. There, you have so many good one-liners of just like inspirational things that and I was just like, well, I'm just gonna have to go back to the recording on this and just listen and be here. But I was really interested. So when you started your 30-day project, what were some of like the highs and lows of that, or like what were some things that surprised you once you started posting those every day?
The thing with any project that you take on, the biggest fear is actually starting. And so you build up the project in your head and you have all these unrealistic expectations in your head of what other people will think and of what you will do yourself. And so for me, the act of just starting without thinking about it really helps negate a lot of that. Another thing that I do is I love to keep journals and write things down. So anytime I have fear about something, I find it's really important to write down what you're thinking, because by writing it down, it helps us separate what is imagined from what is real. And so there's some questions that you can ask yourself. You can ask yourself, what will I achieve if I go through with this? If I face my fear, what do I achieve? And then what do I lose out if I don't push past this? And 99% of the time, you're going to find that if by pushing past your fear, you're going to gain so much more versus not facing it, you know? And along the way, I suppose, like, you know, with any process, once you get past the 15 days, there's less pressure. You start enjoying the process of doing it because you're no longer stuck in the process. I mean, not the process, in the trying to get it perfect. You're just enjoying the process of doing what you're doing. That's why it's important to do 30 days, because it takes, I think it's 2 weeks to create a habit. And once the habit's done, by creating a discipline of doing it consistently, you can quickly evolve your work. I hope that answers the question. Is that, yeah, okay.
What motivates you to just doing whatever you set your mind to? Because it seems like you do a lot, and you push yourself to be able to do those things. So what helps you to do that?
Well, I suppose I don't want to live a life of regret, you know? When you don't do things and you carry on and then you look back and you're like, oh, I wish I did that. I wish I'd taken that opportunity. Sometimes it takes us a while to realize that, you know, the best thing to do is say yes to these opportunities. And that way you don't regret it later on. I mean, what's the worst that'll happen? You miss out, you know? What's the best that'll happen? You gain a new experience, you create a book, you meet new people, you know, like, I think if you switch the mindset to, you know, there's so much opportunity out there, it's just up to us to choose what is right for us. Does that help?
It does. Thank you. A lot of things you said today was very, very helpful. So thank you.
How many times or iterations did you have till you had one version that you liked, of the story you enjoyed yourself?
It's all about practice. So the more you do, the better you get at it. And, you know, like prior 2020, I was afraid of doing video stuff. I didn't want to do it because I was like, I don't have the skills. The video is going to be crappy and I'm not sure how it's going to go. But, you know, 2020 gave me that pause. We all had COVID and everybody was stuck at home. And I was like, I just need to do it. And so I started by just doing short videos on Instagram. You know, IGTV was a new release at that point. And then with each video, I got a little bit better, tiny tweaks, 1% better each video, you know, fix the audio a little bit. Okay, I realized if I face the window, lighting's better. You know, all these small tweaks eventually start cleaning up your work. So the same applies for my storytelling. The first time you do it, it's a bit messy, you know? And then at the end of it, you think, okay, how can I make it a little bit better? The second time you do it, it's that little bit better. And now you're like, okay, how do I improve that again? And so you go through this process of iteration until you get it down. Even today, even though it sounded one way to you, there was things that I didn't share that I shared in other talks. And sometimes it's just the context of who's there and who you're talking to and what's relevant to them. But the key facts are there. They help keep you within that storyline. So that's why I don't write things on my slides. They're just visual cues. It gives me a cue to talk about it, and I'm not stuck in one line or one way of saying it, you know?
That's right. Thank you very much.
Ashwin, where are you in the world?
I'm in Dublin.
It's neighbors to Nick.
Yeah. Just down the road from Nick. No.
Ashwin!
Nick, did you have anything that you wanted to ask or comment or share?
Yeah, I'll chime in with this one particular question now. So you mentioned, Ash, how when we let lies fester, they become our reality. And that's the big danger in how we're talking about ourselves and so on. So an example of said lie that you gave is, I'm a fraud. Here's the question. How do we know what's a lie?
So often when we tell a lie, it's not based in reality, because when we check the facts, they don't line up. So for instance, I only started doing illustration full-time 2 years ago. Prior to that, I was doing graphic design in advertising and art direction. And so the lie I tell myself is, you're not an illustrator, right? How can you claim that title when you've only been doing it full-time for a year or 2 years? But if you check the facts of the work I've done prior to these 2 years, the last 10 years, I've done some level of illustration continually. Just because my job has changed is not an indication of how much work has gone into it prior to that. You're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. The work has gone in before. And so you can check the facts of your own career, your own work, the work you've done prior to, say, where the lie is turning up. And that's how I would separate a lie from the reality.
Okay, I appreciate that. I like what you're throwing down, but I'm gonna come back at you with something here, right? So we want to pursue things that feel out of reach, right? Because they're the things that are going to lead us to unexpected places, and we need to take a leap of faith to do that. And oftentimes that means doing new things. So we don't have a back catalog of stuff. Hence, I'm going to be feeling like I've never done this before. It's not good enough. It's not worthy of people's attention or time. And maybe that's going to tailspin into other, fears and anxieties. What the heck?
The big thing there is not saying you're an expert, but by sharing your work and saying, hey, I'm learning and I would love your feedback so I can grow, so I can get better. And by switching it from, rather than claiming something that you don't have, you're not claiming it, you're just saying, this is something I am pursuing and I would love to hear feedback about it. I'd love to get better at it. Can you help me through this process? And other people along the same journey will relate to that story. They'll reach out, they'll say, good job, you're doing well, or maybe you can improve this area. This is an area I'm struggling with. And so by switching how you approach the project helps you pursue that unexpected thing that you want to attain. Does that answer it?
It is indeed an answer, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
That was a good one. Ashwin, you were talking about that 30-day challenge, and you touched upon this a bit, but was there anything else about the constraints that you gave yourself that helped you move forward with that challenge besides just 30 days, you're posting once a day? Was there anything else, any other constraints or? Well,
it had to be a quote. It couldn't just be one word, and it had to be typography based. So the heaviness, it was minimal illustration, maximum typography. And the idea was to explore different typographical styles as well. So trying variations in the typography.
Have you done other 30-day challenges besides this one? Or any other type of challenge for yourself?
I used to do Inktober's. I don't know if you're aware of that, but like it was made popular by this comic book artist. So creating ink drawings for 30 days. I've done that before.
And then would you say that this 30-day challenge jump-started you or launched you into something?
I don't think it jump-started me, but it did open up doors for me to then get work as a typographer. So at the end of those 30 days, when I consolidated the book, I started reaching out to art directors and I said, hey, I would love to show you my work. And I brought the physical book with me, showed it to them, as well as the other stuff I did. And then I started getting hired to do typography work.
Very cool. Very cool. And then could you expand a bit more? I loved how you boiled down self-pity versus self-care. That was brilliant. And it gave just such a clear difference between the two. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what the I know you did a bit, but I would just love to hear you expand a little more about the self-pity, and then what does self-care look like?
So self-pity keeps you in the past. You're constantly reliving those past experiences, whereas self-care puts your eyes on the future. Your focus is no longer on what you can't do, but what you can do to change your situation. This is that thing of choice. We can choose to look back or we can choose to look forward. And that comes with having a hope for a better future or a hope for things to be different. Without hope, it's not possible. I think a big part of that is learning to talk to people about what you're facing. It's really important to have a supportive community of people that you can share your struggles with, because they will help you through that process. They will keep you accountable within that space. The second thing is understanding who you are is such a crucial part of this, and understanding your value, your intrinsic value, without having done any work whatsoever. The moment you're born, you are valuable as you are. You know, you were created a masterpiece, you're unique, and you need to accept that fact that you are going to bring a very unique perspective and story into the world, because only you have lived your life experiences. So comparison is not going to help you, because nobody else has lived those same life experiences. And so only you can bring your unique perspective into the world in that unique way. There, like they say, there's nothing new under the sun, but we all experience the same thing different ways. So we might all be in the same talk, but each one of you would have taken something different away from it because of your own experiences in the world. And certain lines or words would stand out to you specifically because it relates to you. So that's where I would go with self-pity versus self-care, you know.
Thanks for breaking that down. I really appreciate that.
That was a real zinger right there. I mean, it's all good, but that was a real zinger. That was class.
One more thing that I want to say is learn to celebrate your milestones. This is really important. You know, a big part is that often we don't look back and celebrate what good we've done. We only focus on the negative of what we didn't do. And so if we celebrate those milestones, how much you've achieved in the last 3 months, 6 months, 3 days, that helps propel us forward. That's self-care versus self-pity.
That's brilliant. Such a good reminder. Victor.
Hey, Ashwin.
Hey.
So I love the way you ended on something about you're weird. And maybe it's because I was watching the spelling bee yesterday, which I'm a fan. But I've been stuck on the etymology of weird lately. And weird used to come from being able to have the power to control or influence destiny. And so it seems by accepting your own weird, you're able to do that for yourself. And so I have a question that kind of comes from a little bit of that. And so as your beliefs changed, but your identity didn't, as in moving from graphic designer to illustrator, while we know how we position to the market does matter, how do the labels matter to you now, if at all anymore?
So for me, the job title doesn't matter because it's constantly changing, but the intrinsic value of what I can bring matters greatly. It's the foundation that I constantly look back to, my why, as it were. That's what I look at. And so my job title might change, but I'll go back to the foundation of why am I doing what I'm doing? And so that way the medium can change. It could be illustration, it could be video, it could be a talk, it could be teaching. But anytime I'm confused, I go back to that why of what I'm doing. And so that way the title doesn't matter, but the identity does. Who am I and why do I do what I do? Does that make sense?
Very much so. I just wanted to get your viewpoint out there.
Victor, can you repeat again the etymology of weird?
Oh, it comes from Germanic side. And it's having the power to control destiny, or depending on where you get others, it might be influence destiny. And it wasn't until I think it started getting into Shakespeare where you started having the fates and it became the Weirding sisters. But, oh yeah, I'm a sucker for the spelling bee. It's my
Weird
it's my
Sisters.
It's my world.
Weird Sisters is one of my favorite books by an author called Terry Pratchett, and it's about those 3 witches from the Othello. Yeah, awesome.
Oh, I love Terry Pratchett. Brilliant.
Thank you for bringing that, Victor. Really appreciate that. Love that. Any other comments, questions, thoughts?
I was wondering if you would broach into one kind of factor here, which hasn't been addressed and often doesn't, but you kind of poked at it a few times in terms of understanding. And yesterday I was thinking about what I'm about to talk about, and I looked up how we find a cure for a disease. It said, before trying to cure a disease, the first question a scientist asks is, what's causing the disease? Everything comes from there, right? And you mentioned before about the value of understanding. And with that in mind, and on the topic of imposter syndrome, have you got an opinion on why we experience this?
Yeah, it's an insecurity in our identity that causes imposter syndrome. If you're unsure of who you are and the value of who you are, you end up playing this comparison game. And when you start comparing yourself, obviously you only see the tip of the iceberg, as it were, especially on social media. You're just seeing their success stories. You're seeing their highlights, but you don't see the rest of their life. You don't see all the struggle they went through to get there. And you start comparing where you're at, what age you're at, and how come you don't have the same level of success. And when you look back at the root of that, that's because of your own insecurity about your identity, your value, your intrinsic value. And you've connected your value to your work versus who you are. And so it's so important to break your value of who you are from what you do.
So for you, that is the root cause.
Yeah.
What's one thing we can do to help ourselves separate our sense of what we do from our sense of who we are?
I think it's taking the time to get to know yourself. What makes you think? What makes you unique? What makes you weird? Look at your past. Look at your childhood. What made you get excited? What unique perspective do you bring to the world? By doing a little bit of inward processing, it'll start helping you to identify unique things about you. And often the big problem is, growing up and coming out of school, what happens is what made us unique suddenly starts getting pushed aside because everybody wants to just fit in. You want to be normal. You want to be just like everybody else. But I'd say lean into what makes you abnormal, lean into what makes you unique. And that's what will help you solidify your identity. An important part about identity is anchoring it in something that is unshakable. Okay. And so for myself, my identity is anchored in my faith, which is in God. And God sees me as, he says, you're uniquely and wonderfully made, a masterpiece. And so if I think of myself like that, a unique perspective or reflection of God, then, no matter what people say, regardless of what you think, that's his reality. And I'm going to go back to the creator versus everybody else who's the same as me.
Well, first of all, I just want to say how fun it is to have you here. Like, your illustration style is really fun. Your smiley face sweater, love it. And I've been distracted by your microphone eyeball, wondering if he has a name. But
He's Mike.
Oh, he's Mike. Oh, I love it. Okay, it's Mike.
Known as Mikey affectionately, but Mike for short.
That's amazing. Well, I was wondering, okay, so I tried a 30-day challenge and I thought I couldn't trust myself to do it alone. So I asked my 8-year-old daughter if she'd be my art director. And like after a week, my art director was getting really bossy and I wasn't enjoying this anymore. And neither was she. And I realized, like, listening to you when you said your 30-day challenge was attached to learning, like becoming better, I guess, refining like typography skills and learning. You were like focused on typography, and then that focus was focused on being hired as a typographer. And I realized like I didn't have a goal. It was just like make content and try to make it fun. But then you sometimes when like the why, I guess, is too big, like say yes, we don't want to miss out and have regrets, I get lost in that. And you recently said, like, why am I doing what I'm doing, if you're ever not really sure. But do you ever have trouble answering that question? Like, is everything anchored to something, or is every challenge anchored to a mini goal that aims at that something?
Yeah, so prior to 2020, I didn't know what my why was. I the pause moment gave me the time to actually think through that. Prior to that, I was working on autopilot. You're just like jumping from one job to the next job. So you're paying rent, you've got your job covered, you've got your basic needs covered. But when you take the time to find your why, what that does is it makes your decision making so much easier, because anytime you have a decision, you can look back to the root and say, okay, does this help me, or does this answer my why, or does it not? And then you can easily say yes or no. Does this help me pursue that deeper mission that I have? Prior to that, what helps as well is, like you said, with the 30-day goal, my larger goal was getting hired. But in order to get hired, I had to break that goal down into smaller, more achievable goals, more achievable milestones. And that's why it was 30 days to just get better. And so I find any challenge, there has to be something that is motivating you to do the challenge. Otherwise, you're going to give up, because there's no reason for you to keep going. This is the thing with, like, if you look at athletes, long distance, they have to have the headspace for what they want to do and why they want to achieve it. They have a deeper mission to accomplish that goal. Otherwise, when the pain comes, you're like, okay, I've had enough. I'm gonna clock out. Mm-hmm. But the deeper why is what drives us to then pursue that goal, regardless of the pain we have to push through.
And what of those milestones? Can you give us like a couple of examples of those milestones that existed for the goal of get hired, and then the kind of, I think then a sub goal of get better?
Yeah, so for me, it started with the big picture was get hired. So the first goal I had to do was get better. And so that was the 30-day challenge. The next goal was, okay, now that I've gotten better, I'm happy with the work I do. How do I present this work to art directors? How do I present it so that it's unique and it affords the possibility of getting hired? Because even though you may have attained a skill, nobody else knows about it until you share that idea or share that thought or bring it into the world. And so I was like, how do I do it in a unique way that is both beneficial to myself and beneficial to others? And so that's why I created a book, because it was, number one, it helped me show the work to other people, but also it wasn't wasted on myself alone. I was able to then use it to share the work with other creatives so that they could help themselves through their business or through their time as freelancers. And so that was the creation. And then the next step was having the guts to go and call all these art directors and say, okay, I've got something. Would you be willing to meet so I can show you some stuff? And then after that, it's like the key work, everything I can do to help achieve this has been done. Now it's up to other people, and you leave it at that. Like another big one, a big challenge for me was getting published as a children's book author. And, the first time I wrote a story was maybe 2017 or 2018, and I really, really wanted to get published. So I sent it out to all these different publishers, and 6 months go by, no answer. 1 year goes by, one rejection letter. And then at this stage, I've lost all will and hope for finishing the book because that passion, that fire is gone. And then in 2020, again, when I had that space to pause and reflect, I was like, I don't want any regrets going forward. So I was like, I'm just going to write and finish a book. I finished it and then I self-published it. Once I self-published it, I started getting it out there. The process of self-publishing allowed or offered me opportunities in the children's book festivals, because people were like, through 2020, they were looking for people who have published their books, and I got opportunities to speak and share the work there. And then fast forward to now, today, 3 publishers have reached out to me, and I'm getting work published in the next few years. But it was a process of starting and doing the work and then pursuing that. So I hope that helps.
Amazing. How can we buy your book?
On my website, wackochacko.com. I'm gonna put it in the chat.
Yeah.
Just when you said like taking the time to understand yourself and kind of how do you have any tips on how you might go about doing that? I know you ask yourself some questions when you're feeling a little overwhelmed. So what kind of tips would you say or would you use to kind of go and find yourself or understand yourself better?
So I found the Ikigai process really useful. I don't know if you've come across it, but it gives you great question prompts to look at. So it asks you questions like, what are you passionate about? What do you love doing? Then what do you currently do that can get you paid? What can you do that, or what impact do you want to make on the world? And it's one more, I'm trying to remember.
While you do that,
Yeah.
isn't it uncanny that like two threads just keep popping up? One, giving ourselves the space to pause and reflect and document, and 2, what's just come up here, asking ourselves questions. So giving ourselves the space to pause and reflect and ask ourselves questions, just like we do for our clients. It's awesome.
Yeah. So the 4 questions are, what do you love doing? What are you good at? What you can be paid for, and what the world needs. And so what you're good at and what you can be paid for is your profession. What you're good at and what you love is your passion. What the world needs and what you get paid for is your mission and vocation. And so when you consolidate all this information to the center point, that's your Ikigai, or your purpose, as it were. When I did this, I didn't know there was something called Ikigai. I only later found out that I'd watched some videos on the Future channel, and I saw Christo's talk on Ikigai. I was like, oh, that's what it is. So, yeah.
Isn't it uncanny if like I'm just hearing those questions and I'm like, that's literally how plenty of folk would break down marketing and strategy, right? Like, so if you think of the 3 C's, which Mark Ritson would reference very commonly, whatever we're thinking about doing, is it something that the customer wants? Is it something we, the company, can give? And then can we do it better or different than the competition? But it's all basically like, what do they want? What do we want? What's our purpose? It's the same stuff. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's what, like, branding and like personal branding, it's the same thing. Personal branding is just branding for yourself, right? So you need to ask yourself those same questions. Sometimes it is helpful to do this with a friend, because often we're unable to see what makes us unique because we're so close to it. Whereas a friend can say, hey, you're really good at this, And so they can help you narrow it down, but you should do it. You should both do it so you can see where the connections are, where are the links.
You're speaking our language, Ashwin. So that's something that I like what you added though, because I tell people to partner up to do the strategic process in each other. But you did add one extra layer, is do it for yourself too, and then see what crosses over. I think that is really important, because then it gives us an opportunity to be self-reflective too, versus just expecting or putting all of the responsibility on the other person. But it's like getting everything out and uncovering all that's there, and maybe things that we can ask ourselves that come up that the other person didn't even think to ask, because we know our story and we know ourselves. So,
and to practice that like objective self-image, and then to be further able to separate our sense of ourself from that fearful sense of ourself, let's say.
Yeah, I think like it's important to do it for yourself, because sometimes you can hear something from somebody else and you think that is your purpose, but it might not be, or that is your why and it might not be. It's just they've seen something and that's their perspective, but you might not be as passionate about that thing, and you just pursue it because somebody said it about you. And this is why you cross-reference, because that way then you're seeing the link, and the other person is just helping you confirm what you already know in your gut.
that's
Angela, just do it. Go draw.
Okay, I'm gonna flip the script on you guys. I have 2 questions for you. I'm gonna ask the first one, and then I'm gonna ask you guys to nominate someone to answer it. So you're gonna put in the chat someone's name that you're gonna nominate them to answer it. So instead of asking for volunteers, volunteer somebody else. First question is, what was most useful for you today? So give me a nominate someone in the chat to answer that question. Okay, we got a couple we got 3 for Aaron. Aaron.
Oh, by the way, Ashwin, thank you so much for all of this. This has been incredible. That presentation was so much fun to watch. I've been thinking a lot, honestly, about a lot of this lately. What was it? Oh, okay. So when you were talking about the source of imposter syndrome and how you kind of combat it by anchoring yourself in something unshakable, like that's something that I've been kind of like searching for what that is for me. And so hearing that repeated now, when it's something that I've been like, thinking about for so long, has been useful, because now that's like something that I'm going to be like actively like working on and exploring for myself. So that was what's most useful for me.
Okay, first of all, I'm like super inspired to draw. I really also love like the why thing is really important to me. So it's just like so cool to hear you say how it has helped you also. There are so many good things that I wrote down. One thing that you said that I just loved was to look at mistakes as a teacher. And like, I don't know, I think it's really easy to like get caught up in mistakes and have that like validate all the bad things you feel about yourself. But looking at it as a teacher of like, okay, what did I learn from this? Like, I don't know. I love that. And I love the embrace the weird. That's like always a good reminder.
Also, Ashwin, thank you so much. You were a delight to listen to. And you're just like, your manner is really gentle and wise, which is definitely what I needed today. So thank you. Most useful thing to me today, from what you've said, there are a lot of things, but the thing that I wrote down that stuck in my mind was comparison is not going to help you. I think that in a lot of ways in my own life, but I think just sort of generally this might be something that a lot of other people do, that we sort of gauge how we're doing by looking at how other people are doing, or try to figure out where we should be based off of where others are. And so just that reminder that comparison it might be useful, maybe, but like only up to a point. Like there's a point at which it ceases to actually be helpful, to be useful, to be data that you can use to sort of navigate through the world. So yeah, that was sort of one of the huge key takeaways that I took.
Yeah, the minute comparison causes you to stop propelling yourself forward, it loses its power or what's good about it, you know.
Very true. All right, next question. This might be difficult, but do your best here. What's one thing, even if it's super small, one action that you can take after today? So after listening to this whole thing, after listening to Ashwin's story, what he shared, what is one thing, one action that you could take after this?
I think I want to play with this Ikigai thing.
Oh, that was going to be my thing, Zoe. I was definitely going to get that book, definitely going to read it and take some actions. But also going to look at the difference between self-pity and self-care. I thought that was really cool today, and want to explore that a little bit more, kind of dig into my thoughts and maybe ask my partner a few questions on it as well. I think it'll be interesting. So
I can get the words out. Is really writing out how I feel to compare like the reality versus the assumptions. I think that would be very helpful for me personally, because I do overthink and thinking about, well, this probably is not going to be that great or good or whatever assumptions I'm coming up with in my own head, but really just writing it out and comparing like, oh, maybe I'm just tripping and just need to do.
Ashwin, I love what you said about you were talking about your fear, like that feeling of fear, and when you felt that became like a prompt for you to just start writing like everything that you're thinking and feeling and doing. And I loved that, because it's like taking that energy and actually doing something with it. It's probably very therapeutic in some way. But also it's like you're capturing how like you're thinking in that moment, because so many times like after you get over that fear, you really forget like all the thoughts that were going through your head in that moment. So just being able to capture them, I feel like will just help the next person that feels it, you know.
This is why I really encourage keeping a journal. I've been telling Melinda about this as well. It's super handy to just consolidate your thoughts, even if it's like at the start of the morning or the evening, whatever it might be.
Yeah, so a couple of things I took away too, Ashwin, when you talked about journaling, and then the specific questions that you asked. What will I achieve if I do this? What will I lose if I don't do this? I think having those really specific questions were super helpful. The other thing was learning to celebrate your milestones and remembering that, because I go through seasons of making sure to celebrate the milestones. But if I'm hyper focused on something, I'm so focused on that I don't see the progress that's made. So having that. And then I loved what Angela brought up, using fear as the prompt to write. And so now I have the pathway of like, oh, it's like using the habit trigger. Like, oh, the fear is that first feeling that then triggers me to usually go into like a frantic worry or trying to rush to do something. Instead, I can use that, okay, that's a clue, I need to go and write. And then I have questions that I can ask myself during that time.
It's also like, you know, such a wonderful door to self-care, because in the moment then you're reprioritizing, you're saying no, whatever the task I was focusing on, whatever stuff I was doing, it's no longer a priority. Now that I recognize I'm fearful, anxious, stressed, feeling guilty, whatever it is, I'm the priority now. This feeling, this emotion, and the reasons behind it, that's priority. So I love that aspect of again using fear as the prompt to reflect,
which is also reinforcing self-care, right? It's all coming back to that. Amazing. Ashwin, this was so useful. Are there any final thoughts that you wanted to share, or anything else pop in that you feel might be useful for us?
No, just remember you're valuable just the way you are. So be you, and then just do it.
Ash, have you learned anything today?
I didn't know that thing about the etymology of the weird, so I'm going to check that out. That sounds interesting. Link it to my talk some more.
Yes, most definitely. So everyone, I encourage you to go to Ashwin's website, check out his Instagram, connect with him, and keep following along with what he's doing, because he's always doing new fun stuff. And I'm really excited to get some of your stuff too, the books and sweatshirt and all that. So thank you so much. We so appreciate you. I have 2.5 pages of notes. I am super thankful. And thanks everyone for bringing your questions and your experiences and thoughts and everything. So we'll see you in Slack and next week in our Q&As. All right, guys?
Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you.